I've been thinking recently about selling my truck and going to drive a company truck, just a change of pace. My truck is 10 years old now, and ordinarily by this time I would have traded for a new truck. It's been a good truck, maintenance wise. It hasn't cost me a whole lot in repairs, but I thought, well, maybe I should sell it, ease back a little, get a company job rather than put money into the old truck and rebuild it. So I thought I'd do a little research. So I called about a dozen places. I came away disappointed for the most part and a little disillusioned, and I'll tell you why. I surveyed a dozen carriers, some big, some small, but I wanted an overall picture of what was available to me out there. I would have thought since 1984, which was the last time I drove a company truck, that things would have changed quite a bit in the industry. One thing with, the cost of everything going up and the apparent driver shortage, I thought that they'd be treating me like gold and throwing money at me. I was surprised. One of the worst interviews I had, probably the worst, was I interviewed with a super carrier, a huge carrier, probably the biggest carrier in North America, to be honest. And I thought, boy, those guys, should really have their act together. I'd like to work for them, something that organized. I called. I got their first recruiter on the phone who was able to answer my first question, which was, how much do they pay by the mile? My second question was, how much do they pay for detention time? And she was stumped. Didn't know the answer to the second question. So after trying to speak to her co-workers within earshot for a minute or two, she said, let me find you someone who knows the answer to that question, and she put me on hold. I was on hold for about 5 minutes. Got the second recruiter on the phone who was able to tell me that they don't pay any detention time, but at least he knew the answer. So I went to my third question, which was about the benefit package. Well, he knew they had one, but he didn't know anything about it. And by this point already, these guys had lost me. And I was surprised that a super carrier like this wouldn't have done a better job of recruiting, especially recruiting an experienced guy, because they've got seats to fill. But I was disappointed. They talked to me like I was nobody. Didn't really want to spend the time on the phone with me. They weren't interested. So I dismissed them from my list. Now, in all fairness, I talked to another super carrier, and I don't mind telling you who it was. I talked to Celadon, and I was very impressed with them. Their recruiter knew all the answers to all my questions. They treated me professionally. I came away impressed overall from that interview. I surveyed some of the smaller carriers too, and got, as you might expect, good response from some of the smaller carriers. In one case, the guy doing the recruiting, and I found this out after the interview, that the fellow doing the recruiting was actually the owner, and as it turned out, that was a very good, comfortable interview with him. But he obviously cared. And I was surprised how many of the carriers, it was just yeah, this is it, and they didn't care whether they talked me on board or not. And I thought that was a driver recruiter's job, was to try to find good drivers and get them on board. But most of the recruiters I talked to could have cared one way or the other. Now for me too, detention time was a big issue, was a big question for me. And anyone that's driven for a while knows from experience that you can easily put in 20 hours of non-driving time a week while you're out there working for the carrier. One of the questions I asked when I was trying to determine detention time was, I gave them an example. I said, well, let's say I'm out on the road with your truck and it breaks down and I'm on the side of the road for hours on end waiting for a repair guy or a tow truck. What does that pay me? I get paid by the mile when it's moving, yes, but when it's stopped and it's not my fault, what are you paying me for that? Almost without exception, None of them paid anything. Now, there were a couple of guys that said, well, you know, something like that might be at the discretion of the dispatcher and maybe he'd throw you a few bucks. It would depend on the circumstances. So they wouldn't give me a solid number on what it paid. I just had to kind of hope that maybe the dispatcher would feel sorry for me and give me something, but certainly not a set rate by the hour. And you know, as I said earlier, you can rack up an awful lot of hours when you're not moving by the mile, but you're still donating your time because that's part of your job. A lot of the carriers too said, well, you know, when you get to a customer, the first hour or two is free. And I thought, free? Why am I out there working for free? Now, I know this is expected, it's kind of an industry standard, but I don't agree with it. And the hours that you're out there with the truck working for somebody else add up. It's a big deal. Most guys work 40 hours a week. So, and I don't mean driving, I mean school teachers, office workers, most people. Now, if they didn't get paid for half their week, that's a big thing. And here we are putting in more hours than them in a week, but not getting paid for, at least a third to a half. That's kind of crazy. So I was disappointed with that. And something else they stressed to me too was, I said, how much home time will I get? They said, well, you can expect a day and a half off a week roughly. So I said, basically just long enough to reset. Yes, they said, basically long enough to reset. So not great home time. But I said, okay, so what happens if I'm not home and I run out of hours and I have to reset? I'm not home. Do you pay me for that? No, we don't pay for resets because you're out there because it's an hours of service rule. It's not our fault that you're still out there. So you can spend your day and a half sitting in a truck stop for free, spending money to eat. Most jobs, people work till Friday afternoon and they start again Monday morning. And they're not working as many hours a week as we are. So I thought, boy, that's not great. You know, it's all adding up to the fact that no wonder there's a driver shortage. I thought in this day and age, with good drivers being so hard to find, that the packages would have improved considerably. I knew that company drivers weren't paid what they should be paid, but even I had no idea how bad it was. I was sure by this time, in this day and age, that there would be detention time paid by the hour for these guys when they weren't being paid by the mile. At the end of the day, I looked at the whole thing and decided that I wouldn't make enough money in the time period allotted to make it worth my while. I sat down and crunched all the numbers from all the carriers I talked to, figured out the wages as compared to the cost of living and the expense of living on the road. I thought, wow, I'd be better off working at Walmart and having my weekends at home than driving a company truck. No wonder there's a driver shortage. The driver wages have got to get better, or no one worthwhile is going to be doing it. I thought a fellow like me with a clean abstract, almost 4 million miles, with almost 40 years experience, would demand a good dollar. It wouldn't in any other industry. You'd pay top buck for a guy with that kind of experience. Not in trucking. And that's got to change.